Hey everybody, and welcome to Flight Test. I'm John Overstreet. Today we're going to be building a P-51. The P-51 is the next release in the Flight Test Master Series lineup. I'm so excited about this particular plane. Growing up, I loved the P-51, specifically the D model. It wasn't until I started working with this aircraft that I really began to appreciate the lines on the earlier B and C model. The end user is going to have a choice of building either the D or the earlier B and C model. So I'm really curious, when the dust settles, are there going to be more of the D model floating around or more of the B and C? Time will tell. For the next few hours, we're going to go over the assembly of the P-51 step by step in great detail. If you take your time, follow the instructions, at the end of this, you're going to have a great looking airplane. Now, the P-51 is not the easiest plane to build. In fact, it's probably one of the tougher ones. It's not quite as hard as the P-38, but it's up there. So if you have never built a Master Series aircraft, I'd start with probably the Corsair, P-47, maybe even the Spitfire. This would be a good number 2 plane. The Master Series P-51 Mustang is going to be available as a speed build kit, but it's going to be made using maker's foam instead of the classic Flight Test foam board. What's the difference? The maker's foam is white instead of brown. So if you like painting aircraft, you are going to love maker's foam. The P-51 Mustang will also be available as a free download. If you take advantage of the free download, I would like to recommend Adam's Ready Board. There's a few things about Adam's Ready Board that makes it really well suited for building aircraft. First of all, it's very lightweight. There are a lot of other foams out there that are very dense and very heavy. This severely affects flight performance. Also, Adam's Ready Board is very strong. And most importantly, it's pliable. Look at some of these shapes we're able to get. All these aircraft that I'm building are built using Adam's Ready Board. With that said, what do you say we get started? If you've watched other Master Series build videos, you'll notice that I always start with the wings. I've decided to mix things up this time, and we're going to start with the fuselage. The Flight Test Master Series P-51 build kit will allow you to build either the earlier B or C model, or you can build the D model. We're going to start with the nose of the aircraft. The nose of the aircraft will be common to both versions. Go ahead and remove the following pieces from your kit. You'll see here that I've got 3 F1 formers, 3 F2 formers, 2 F3 formers, 1 F4 former, 3 F5 formers. We've got a battery box. You're going to find 4 little skinny pieces, and then you're going to remove C2, C3, and C4. C1 will be added at a later time. Let's start by gluing the formers together. Set your battery box in the 3 parts marked C2, C3, and C4 off to the side. Let's start by gluing the 3 F1 formers together. Make sure that the window lines up exactly and the crop mark at the bottom lines up exactly. It's very important that the window is exactly lined up. Whenever we go to slide the battery box in, if they're not lined up, it'll be a little bit more difficult to put in place. Let's do the same on F2. Same on F3. Okay, F4 is actually going to be glued to the back side of the F3. So I'm going to flip F3 over. And I'll glue F4 in place. You'll notice that the cutout lines up exactly. Go ahead and grab these 4 skinny parts. We're going to glue 2 of them together. And now we'll glue the other 2 together. Once that's done, look for this little outline right here at the edge of the former. We're going to glue one of these little squares on one side and then one on the other. I'm making sure that the outer edge is flush with the outer edge of the former. While that's cooling down, let's glue the 3 F5 formers together. Double check and make sure they're stacked exactly on top of one another. Take your F3 former with the 2 rectangular blocks, flip it upside down like I'm showing here, and I'm going to set the F5 former on top of the F4 former. I'm going to glue the F5 former to the F4, making sure that it's going to be aligned flush here at the top and on the sides. Let's apply some glue. Stick that in place. Checking to make sure everything's flush. Move the formers off to the side. Let's fold up the battery box. To form the battery box, I'm first going to go down each of the scores with the back side of a razor blade. I don't want to cut all the way through, but I do want to make sure that the score goes all the way through to the paper on the back side. So you can see I've got my razor blade upside down. I'm going to run the back of the blade down each of the scores. Once that's done, I'm going to break it open and I'm going to remove this center piece. With the pieces removed, let's test fold the battery box. This is going to be a B fold, so when I fold the sides up, they're going to be beside the bottom plate. The top is also a B fold. That looks good. Open it back up, apply a line of glue here and a line of glue here. As I'm folding the sides up, I'm pushing them straight down to the tabletop. Allow that to cool for about 45 seconds and then we'll do the top. Now that that's cooled down, I'm going to apply glue on this edge and on this top edge right here. Again, we're doing a B fold, so the side walls are beside the top plate. I'm going to flip it upside down and push down. I'm going to slide a little bit on the tabletop, so in case there's some excess glue, it won't stick to the tabletop. I'm going to hold pressure for about 30 seconds and then we'll move on to the next step. Once a battery box is fully cooled, grab the F1 former and slide it over the battery box. Make sure that you're sliding it over the right side. It's going to be on the side that has these little indicator marks. Once I've got it slid over, I'm going to push the former to where it just is even with this step here in the front. You'll notice that it also lines up with these little indicator marks. Once that's done, let's run a bead of glue all the way around the front and the back. While that's cooling down, grab your C2, C3, and C4 nose skins. You'll notice that one side has a number and the other doesn't. Peel off the side with the number. Do this on all 3 parts. Once that's done, grab the part that's labeled C2, and we're going to go ahead and form this over the edge of the table. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this over the edge while applying downward pressure. It's always a little tricky at first to know how much pressure to apply, and so I always want to make sure I give you a starting point. Apply even pressure across the part like I'm doing here. I'm going to flip it over, and you're going to see a small indentation in the foam. There's a very distinct line. If you press too hard, you're going to get a crease. If you're not pressing hard enough, it won't mark the foam at all. You will quickly get a feel for this as you're shaping. So, applying the pressure as described, I'm going to draw the part down with my left hand while applying pressure with my right hand. I'm watching to make sure that I've got a perfect 90-degree between the table and the part. So as I draw down, I'm going to have to rotate the part just slightly to keep that 90-degree. Okay? So I'm applying pressure, drawing down, and slightly rotating. It doesn't take much pressure to form this part. As I'm drawing down with my left hand, I'm also sliding my right hand down. You'll see that the part is taking shape. Let's do this a couple more times. I'm applying a little bit more pressure than I was doing when I started. As I get to the end, I'm going to add a little bit of extra shape. And I'm just bending this with the tips of my fingers. Now I'm going to roll the two edges together. And what I want to make sure is that the two edges are coming together flat. I don't want them to come together like this. I don't want them to come together like this. I want them to be flat. I'm going to go ahead and tear off a couple pieces of tape. I'm going to apply glue to this side. And when I stick the two sides together, I'm going to come in high on this side, and this side is going to shingle over this side just slightly. You'll notice when I do that, the glue squirts towards the inside. You can see I don't have any glue visible here on the top. I'm going to pinch it between my finger and thumb and apply a piece of tape. Once that's done, I'm going to set this part off to the side, and let's do the next one. This is done exactly the same way. I'm going to draw it down, maintaining that 90-degree angle to the table. Add a little bit of extra bend to the end. Glue this side like we did on the other part. And I'll shingle this side over the side I glued just slightly. Pinch it together, apply a piece of tape. This one's wide enough, I think I can get a second piece on there too. I always try to get tape as close to the edge as I can, because if the part's going to split, it'll always start at one end or the other. Let's do the same on the last part. Once you get that taped, set that off to the side. Grab your battery box. That's had plenty of time to cool down. And we're going to grab the part with the C2 label. What we're going to do first is we're going to fit this right over the F1 former. I want to make sure that the crop mark is lined up at the bottom. And we'll start stretching this over. Now it looks like that we're not even close. It looks like this former's too big. And the reason that the former is too big is you're going to notice that there's a pretty steep taper right here. So we're going to go around this bottom edge of the F1 former and make a bevel using a razor blade. You can see that I'm cutting all the way through the first layer and getting into the second layer. So you'll see that we've added a little bit of relief. So again, I'm going to line up the crop mark to the seam and we'll try to slide that over. Okay, it's still just a little bit tight, but you'll notice that here at the top we've also got a little bit of a taper. So I'm going to remove a small amount of material from the top of the F1 former. Let's try test fitting it again. Making sure my seam is lined up to the crop mark. Now it slides over. I want to slide this former up far enough that there's only one layer of foam sticking out. That fit looks really good. Before I glue it, I'm going to grab a piece of scrap foam because as I'm applying glue here, I want to be able to shove the glue inside, but I don't want it to build up on this one layer. If it builds up, it's going to make sliding the next layer on very difficult, and it's going to create a pretty big gap. Apply a pretty heavy bead all the way around. And using a piece of scrap, I'm going to wipe away all the excess. Let that cool down for a full minute and a half, and then we'll add the next section. Set your battery box off to the side. Grab the part labeled C3 and your F2 former. We're going to put the small side of the C3 skin on the tabletop, and we're going to fit the F2 former into the larger side. You'll notice that I'm aligning the crop mark here at the top. It's a pretty tight fit. Let's do a little bit of beveling like we did on the first part. It's not going to require much material to be removed. That should get it. I'm going to push it down to where there's only one layer of foam sticking up. I'm going to peel the tape back, and just like on the first part, we're going to run a bead of glue all the way around and then remove the excess. I'm going to check one last time that my crop marks are lined up. They look good. Let that cool down for a minute and a half, and then we're going to connect these two parts together. Now we're going to connect these two pieces together. Before I slide this over, I'm going to add a bevel all the way around this edge. That's going to help this skin to slide over this former. You can see I'm not taking much material. I just want to remove a small amount so that it'll slide over just a little easier. Now slide the battery box through the F2 former. I'm going to move this over to the edge of the table. This will help give me a little bit of leverage as I'm pushing the two pieces together. You can see that the two edges are coming together pretty nice. I'm going to tear off several pieces of tape before I go any further. Checking my test fit one more time, make sure I don't have any excessive gaps anywhere. And I'm double checking that my seams line up and my crop marks line up. Pull that back. I'm going to apply a heavy bead of glue all the way around. I've already got the tape staged. I also want to get a piece of scrap foam because it's very likely when I squeeze the two parts together that I'm going to have excess glue squirting out. You can see I'm putting glue right where the skin meets the former. Slide the two parts together. Double checking that my seam matches up. You can see I've got a little excess glue there. I'm going to wipe that away real quick. And anywhere that I've got a good clean seam coming together, I'm going to apply a piece of tape. Let's start here at the bottom and work my way around. I might need to twist as I'm pushing together so that that seam looks good. With everything taped in place, go ahead and grab your last skin. This is the one with the C4, and let's slide it over this F2 former. I'm looking at the bottom of my C4 and I've got a big blob of glue there. I'm going to break that away so that won't interfere with the fit. We'll line it up there at the bottom. So just like before, I'm going to tear off several pieces of tape and have them ready. And I've got a piece of scrap foam in case I have excess glue. Checking my alignment. And once my alignment looks good, I'll put a piece of tape here at the bottom. And I'm going to work my way around. I'm going to set it on its nose, and we're going to grab this piece made up from F3, F4, and F5. This is going to drop straight in. And it's going to rest right along the edge of the battery box. So you'll notice whenever you're looking at it from the side, you have part of the former sticking past this angle. I'm going to squeeze lightly on either side. And when I pull this former assembly out, you're going to see some lines on the inside of the skin. When applying glue, make sure you get glue all along these indentions. You're also going to apply glue to the edge of this battery box. I use quite a bit of glue. I want to give myself plenty of time to get the part in place. I'm applying glue to all the indented areas. Now I'm going to install the assembly. Pushing this up as high as it'll go. There may be a small gap up here at the top, that's alright. Now as it cools down, look where I've got pressure. I'm squeezing here and here. I want to make sure that there's not a gap at the top or at the bottom. Hold this for a full 2 minutes. I want to make sure this part stays in place. Now that the nose is complete, set it off to the side. Let's make some pushrod housings. Pushrod housings are easily made from common materials such as coffee stirrers. We need 2 pushrod housings that are a minimum of 21 inches. The kit may contain a different number. The important thing is that you get 21 inches of pushrod housing. In order to make a pushrod housing, I'm going to take a pushrod and run it through 1 coffee stirrer. Now I'm going to add a second one. Where the 2 meet up, I'm going to apply a piece of tape around the joint. I'm using clear packing tape. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a piece of tape right there where the 2 come together, and then I'm going to roll it. Once that's done, I'm going to slide the 2 down all the way and add a third. And I'll do the same thing. I'm going to check the length, and it looks like I'm just over 21 inches, so that will work just fine. If it comes out 25, 26 inches, that's okay. Don't worry about cutting off the excess now. That'll be done in a later step. Let's go ahead and make one more pushrod housing. This will be done the same way as we did on the first. With the pushrod housings in the nose complete, it's time to decide which configuration of P-51 Mustang that you would like to build. The Flite Test P-51 Speed Build Kit comes with an option of building the B or C model, which is a fastback, or the later D model. We're going to start with the later D model. If you're wanting to build the earlier version, look in the description below. There will be a link that will fast forward you to the correct timestamp. Let's begin building the D model fuselage by removing the following parts from your kit. You'll need 3 skins. You'll see that they're labeled F1, F2, and F3. Also, you'll need 3 formers marked D1 and 3 formers marked D2. We'll start with gluing the 3 D1 formers together. Just make sure that the slot in the middle lines up and the crop mark at the top and bottom line up. Make sure and keep glue away from the holes. These holes are used for the pushrod housings to pass through. It gets a little bit difficult if they get plugged with glue. Let's do the same on D2. Making sure my marks are lined up, and this is lined up here in the center. That looks good. You can set those off to the side to cool. Let's remove paper from the side with the label. We'll do this on all 3 parts. I want to start with the hardest part first. We'll just get it out of the way. This part is a little bit tricky to shape. We need to match the contour of this particular former, the D2. You'll notice that there's quite a bit of shaping that goes on here and then down here at the corners, but the sides are kind of flat. So for starters, we're going to create this shape here at the top. I'm going to put this over on the edge of the table. You're going to notice that there's a crop mark here and here. This is your center. And I'm going to real lightly bend it. I'm going to keep my hand here on the tail section, and I'm going to actually wiggle this back and forth. I'm pivoting here at the back. What I'm doing is I'm creating a taper. This shape will go from here and it'll taper down to this point here at the end. Okay, see what I'm trying to do there? Now I'm going to add a little bit of shape from about here to here. Now I'm going to add this shape from here all the way back to here. And you can see there's about an inch that I'm going to be adding shape to here at the end. And you can see I'm not adding a lot of shape, just a little bit. Let's do the same on the other. I'm going to match this up to the former again, see if we're getting closer. Okay, that looks okay. Now comes the tricky part. You've got to get a pretty tight bend right there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to push this on this side, push it on this side. I want to create an indentation. Trying to create an indentation right here. This is where I want to create my bend. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take and I'm just going to fold this. You'll see I'm bending it at almost a 90 degree. Here at the back, I've got about 3/8 of an inch hanging over the edge of my table. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it on top of the table and I'm going to bend it over ever so slightly. The more I do this, the more it's breaking down the foam and it'll be a lot easier to glue together. I'm being careful not to put a crinkle along here, so I'm just doing a little bit at a time. Each time that I bend it, I go just a little bit further. And now you can see I've got it laid all the way flat. I'm going to hold it like this for about 30 seconds or so, and that'll allow the foam to break down and it'll hold its shape a lot better. After 30 seconds of holding, let's do the same thing on the other side. Once that's done, let's see how it matches up to the former. That looks pretty good. I'm going to tear off several pieces of tape, have them ready. It's a little bit tricky getting this glued without crinkling. I want to put a piece of tape about here. It's about 2/3 the way from the large opening. I'm going to try to get that seam closed up as nice as I can. So now you can see that this edge from the tape all the way to the end lines up really well. Looks like this side's a little bit high. I'm going to make an adjustment before I glue. Once I'm happy with the fit, I'm going to apply a bead of glue right down the middle. I'm going to make sure I've got a piece of scrap foam on standby in case I get some excess. I didn't go all the way to the tape. I stopped about here with the glue. I'm going to open it up just a little bit. I want that glue to drop down into the center if possible. Push the two sides together. I'm holding pressure right on the seam. Put a piece of tape across it. Got a little bit of excess glue here. I'll remove that. Anywhere the seam looks good, I'm going to put a piece of tape. Once that's done, I'll remove this piece of tape here. And we're going to apply a bead of glue right down the center. I'm going to pry apart with my fingers to give me a little bit bigger gap. I want to make sure if the glue drops down it doesn't get on my fingers though. I've got a little excess glue there on the seam. I'm going to take my scrap and wipe it away. Also trying to push it down in that crack a little bit. Press the two sides together. I'm pushing straight down on the seam. This makes sure that the two sides are flat against one another. As that's cooling down, let's fit former D2 into the large end. You can see that it's not wanting to go there at the top. Again, we've got a taper like we did when we were putting the nose together. So we'll add a little bevel back here. Okay, that's going to look good. Got my alignment here at the top. And it looks like it's aligning at the bottom. I've got one layer of foam sticking out all the way around. I'm going to run a bead of glue all the way around like we did in earlier steps. I'll wipe away the excess. If you see a gap, you can squeeze the skin where that gap is spread out over a larger area. Rather than just having a big gap here, you can squeeze it and it can spread between here, maybe all the way down here at the bottom. Let that cool for a minute and a half, and then we'll go on to the next step. While that's cooling down, grab your D1 former and your skin marked F2. We're going to add some shape to the skin marked F2, and it'll wrap around the top of the D1 former. So you can see most of the shaping we need to do is going to be in this area right here. Okay, that's going to fit really nicely. You'll notice that I've still got one layer of foam sticking out. When I glue this in place, I'm going to make sure that this lines up exactly where there's one layer of foam still sticking out. I'll check that on both sides. See, I need to make an adjustment over here and a little adjustment there at the top. That's how I'm going to want to position it once I apply glue. I'm also making sure that this crop mark is lined up and centered. You'll see an indentation all along the inside. And apply quite a bit of glue. I really want to make sure this sticks good. Checking my crop mark at the top, and my alignment looks really good. I've got one layer of foam sticking out exactly on the bottom, at the top, and on this side as well. I'm going to hold this for a full 2 minutes. I want to make sure this part doesn't shift. After that's cooled down, go ahead and tear off several pieces of tape. Let's test fit the two parts. I'm going to make sure that it's aligned here at the top I want to make sure that my seam looks really good. Looks good there, and it looks good there. You can see that these corners are kicked out just a little bit. I'm going to bend them in just a bit. I'll test fit that again. That'll work. That looks really good there. I'm going to apply glue all along this edge, and then we'll stick the two parts together. Anywhere the seam looks good, apply a piece of tape. Keep a little pressure on that for a minute and a half while the glue has a chance to cool down. After that's cooled down, go ahead and grab the skin marked F1. We're going to add some shape to it. This will first be glued to the nose section. This is the shape that we need to make right here. Most of the shaping we're going to be doing is going to be right down the middle between my finger and thumb. This will be done just like we did on the last tail section. I'm also going to add a little bit of shape from here all the way to the end. Very slight, but I want to give it just a little bit of shape. Let's see how this lines up. Okay, that's going to work well. In order to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to put a piece of tape across the bottom here. This is going to help me hold it in place while we're gluing the two pieces together. This doesn't have to be precise. Just needs to be close. You can see where I'm aligning tick marks there at the top. And once I do that, the edges ought to match up really well. Okay, that looks good. Rather than trying to glue both sides at the same time, I'm just going to do the one side and then I'll do the other. You'll notice this is sticking out down here where my thumb is. It's no big deal. We can come back at the end and bend that in place. And I'm going to tear off a little bit of tape before I get started gluing. Start at my center mark. I'm going to cover the former where it's exposed. Also going to run a little bit of glue right where the former meets the skin. Check an alignment at the top. And I'll put a piece of tape right at the top. Push the two edges together. I'm going to slide this up just a little bit. And that closed in that gap right there at the top. That looks really nice. I'm going to hold pressure right here for about a minute and a half while this cools down. Once that's cooled down, I need to glue the other side. It's a little bit tricky to get glue where it needs to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pry this open I'm going to put the nozzle of my glue gun down as far as it'll go and drop it right there on top of the skin. Make sure you don't drip glue on your hand. Okay, looking at my seam, that looks really good. Apply some tape. Once that cools down, we'll deal with these two little corners sticking up. Now that that's had a chance to cool down, bend these corners to match the shape of the nose section. And we'll just put a little bit of glue on the inside of the seam. That'll be enough to hold them in place. If they're wanting to pop out, you can put a piece of tape across them, and that'll hold everything in place. Once that cools down, let's attach the tail section to the front half. All right, I'm checking the alignment of the crop marks. That looks good. And the other side looks good as well. We're going to glue this in one pass. Let's start by tearing off several pieces of tape. And like we've done elsewhere, put a line of glue all the way around where the former meets the skin. Push the two pieces together. A little bit of excess glue to remove. The two edges should be lined up exactly. So I'm applying a little bit of pressure with my fingertips to ensure that these two edges have met up exactly. We'll line up and apply tape to the other side as well. Once that's done, let's install the pushrod housings. The pushrod housings will pass through the D1 former, the D2 former, and it'll come out of a slot here in the back. One will go to the rudder, the other will go to the elevator. I'm going to pass the pushrod housing through the D1 former, guide it through the D2 former, and I'm going to push it all the way out the back. Now I'm going to push the pushrod housing back just a little bit. I need to pass it through this slot right here. Using my fingers to guide it, I'll line it up with the slot and push. Once it's popped through just a little bit, I'll add glue to keep it in place. Let that glue cool for a full minute and a half before you roll the fuselage over. If you don't, you'll have glue running down the side. Now let's do the same on the other side. Passing it through the D1 and the D2. And this time I'm going to use a push rod to catch the end of that housing. That'll help me guide it through the hole. Add some glue to hold it in place. Let that cool for a full minute and a half, and then we're going to run the push rods through the housings. Once that's cooled down, go ahead and run the 23-inch push rod through the housing. You do the same on the other side. Once that's done, we're going to run the center spar. Next, remove the center spar from your kit. Using the back side of a razor blade, run it down both scores. Once that's done, break it over and pull out the centerpiece. We're going to fold this all the way over like this. It looks good. Apply a bead of glue down the center and glue to one side or the other. Once this piece is installed, it's going to provide a lot of strength to the overall airframe, and it's also going to give you a great place to mount servos for your elevator and your rudder. Once that cools down, we're going to do a test fit in the fuselage. You'll notice that this is angled towards the table. I've got my fuselage upside down. I'm going to cut this piece of tape right here. And I'll use that to hold my push rods out of the way for the time being. I'm going to feed this through the D1 former, and then we're going to feed it through the D2 former. If you need to squeeze the fuselage, make sure that you do it where there's a former. If you go back here and squeeze it, you're going to get some crinkles. Okay, I'm having a hard time feeding it through to this D2 former, so I'm going to pull it out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a little bit of a relief here in the back. That'll help it roll in a little bit better. Now what I'm watching is here at the front. You can see that I need to go in a little bit further. Once I do, I can drop this all the way down. Now you'll notice that there's a little notch in the number 4 former. We're going to push this spar in and drop it down right into that notch. Once that's in place, I'm going to apply glue to these number 5 formers in the notch in the number 4 former. I'm going to hold this in place until that glue has fully cooled. Once that's cooled down, I'm going to remove the tape here and here. And I'm going to gently squeeze the push rod housings. I'm going to apply a bead of glue where they pass through the former. Do that back here at D2 also. By doing that, that's going to provide a little bit of stiffness to the push rod housing. This will reduce flex and give you better control in flight. I'm also going to apply a bead of glue between the D1 former and the spar and between the D2 former and the spar. I'm just going to drip it down that seam. I'll do that on both sides. Once that's cooled down, we're going to begin working on the scoop. Remove the following pieces from your kit. These will be labeled I2, I3, I4, and I5. Let's start with removing paper from the side with the label. I want to start by shaping I5. You'll notice that there's an area right here. This is the transition from the side to the bottom. What we're going to do is we're going to run a fold between here and about a 1/4 inch from this corner. I'll put this over on the edge of the table, and I'm going to fold it down. The scoop is kind of boxy in the back, so this is going to give us the shape we're looking for. Do the same on the other side. I'm going to fold that over. That looks good. You'll see that I've got a little bit of foam poking out here on the leading edge. I'm going to take and remove that with a razor blade. This will ensure that there's no gap when we glue the next piece onto it. This is I-4. I'm going to match it up. And I see that I need to bend it about right here. And I can see that there's a peak right here. It doesn't have to be precise, just close. Let's do a test fit. It's lining up okay. Okay, looks like about there. I want to get several pieces of tape ready. I'm going to do my tape a little bit differently this time. I'm going to put one single piece of tape down, and I'm just going to cut some strips. Having little strips like this helps whenever we're making shapes like we're about to make. When we put each of these sections together, we're going to do this in 3 parts. I'm going to start with the edge. I'm going to pay very close attention to get this lined up as best I can. I'm going to hold the 2 pieces together for about 30 seconds. At that point, the glue's cooled down enough that I can put a piece of tape in place, and that'll hold it, and then I can move on to the next section. What I like doing is putting a piece of tape right here and wrapping it around. Now I'm going to flip the part over, and I'm going to apply glue from about here to here. Push that together and hold it for about 30 seconds, and then I'll put a piece of tape in place. I'll flip the part upside down, apply glue to I-4, flip it back over, and I'm going to bend it, and when I bend it, those edges will come together. I'll push that together and hold it for about 30 seconds, and then I'll put a piece of tape in place. Let's let this cool for a full minute and a half, and then we'll put I-3 on. Once that's cooled down, let's take I-3 and let's determine where it needs to have some shape added. Looks like about there. Check the other side. I need to adjust where I bent it just a little bit. Again, you don't have to be exact, just get it close. That looks good. just like before, hold it for about 30 seconds. After that, you'll probably be able to get a piece of tape to hold it in place. I'm going to roll the part upside down. I'm going to push I3 in just a little bit with my finger and apply glue. We'll push these two pieces together. So I've got a little bit of excess. Get a piece of scrap and wipe that away. We'll flip it over and push I3 in. Before moving on, I'm going to get a little bit more tape staged. Now you'll notice that I2 has a couple little tick marks. These are actually going to be facing forward. I2 is done the same way all the other parts are done. Once that's had time to cool, we're going to trim off some excess from the scoop. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on the edge of the table and I'm going to press the side down flat. You can see that the scoop is wrapped around the table's edge. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to run the ruler from the tip where this piece of paper is up to this crop mark. Even with a little variation in the way this scoop went together, when we make this cut, this will make sure that the part is perfectly straight. So whenever we install it onto the fuselage, it'll be a perfect fit. So you can see I've got my ruler right at the edge of the paper where it tapers down to nothing, and I've got this other end of my ruler lined up with a crop mark. Carefully make a cut. Watch your fingers on this step. Now we'll roll it over and do the same on the other side. Alright, there we go. Now let's set this part off to the side. We need to install the rudder, the elevator, and the servos before installing the scoop. For this step you'll need the following. For this step you'll need a couple barbecue skewers, a couple control horns, a horizontal stabilizer, and the vertical stabilizer. Let's start by using the back side of our razor blade and running down the scores on the vertical stabilizer. And let's run down the score on the horizontal stabilizer. There's also one right here. All right, once that's done, let's break open this part on the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer and tear it away. And break open the rudder. I'm going to add a bevel to the rudder using a ruler as a guide and holding my blade about 45 degrees. I'm going to draw my blade across the ruler. I'm going to add a bead of glue right along that bevel. Using a piece of scrap, I'm going to remove the excess glue. This adds a ton of strength to the hinge. Once that's done, we're going to put a barbecue skewer on the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer to give it some strength. So I'm going to come down here, a little over a ½ inch, and using a razor blade, I'm going to put pressure on the barbecue skewer and roll it. And then I can break it. Alright, once that's done, put the barbecue skewer in place. We're going to glue it on the leading edge, put a little glue on this flap, and then roll it around. I push straight down, and now I'm going to roll it all the way over and slide the rudder. Put my ruler on top while it cools down, and our reinforcement is done. Cut off a little bit of excess. And we'll set this part off to the side and begin work on the horizontal stabilizer. Let's fold the horizontal stabilizer all the way back, and let's add a bevel all along this seam. Add a bead of glue like we did before, and remove the excess. Make sure it stays open until the glue is fully cooled down. Once that's done, we're going to take a push rod and we're going to slide it up underneath this piece of paper inside the score. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the control rod all the way across. I'm delaminating the paper from the foam. I'm only going in about 1/4 of an inch. Do it one more time. Once that's done, I'm going to fold this piece of paper back all the way along this score. I'm going to use my ruler and draw it backwards, and this will give me a nice clean fold. There we go. I'm going to take the sharp end of my skewer and I'm going to run it right down this score. I'm going to flip my skewer over using the dull side and press all the way down to the table, and I'm going to open up that score. Now we need to get the barbecue skewer to lay down inside. First thing you need to do is cut the barbecue skewer to length. So I'm lining up one side and the other, marking it with my finger and thumb. And we're going to cut this barbecue skewer. Got pressure applied to the razor blade, and I'm going to roll the barbecue skewer back and forth. The razor blade will saw through, and you can break it off easily. Next, we need to get the barbecue skewer inside this score. And the way I found to do it is I lay my ruler with the metal side down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed this barbecue skewer in. And you'll notice that it's kind of disappearing inside that cavity. I'm going to keep downward pressure on my ruler as I run this barbecue skewer in. It's going to make sure it stays right where it needs to. Once that's done, we're going to apply a bead of glue here, and then we're going to fold this piece of paper over with our ruler. And try to keep my ruler out of the glue. You can see I had a little excess up here on this end. I'll wipe it away using a piece of scrap. And I'll keep downward pressure on my ruler until the glue has had time to cool down. While that's cooling down, I'm going to cut the slots for the horizontal stabilizer. I'm going to apply pressure on both sides. I want to be careful not to crinkle stuff, but I want to squeeze it as much as the material will allow. You'll notice a dotted line on both sides. I want to hold my razor blade horizontal as I'm cutting the dotted line. Now I'm just going to connect the dots. And we'll do the same on the other side. Once that's done, let's do a test fit of the horizontal stabilizer. You'll notice that I'm centering it in this knockout on the horizontal stabilizer. You'll notice where the hinge is for the elevator. See it here, and you can see it here. We're going to remove a piece of the fuselage here at the tail. I'm being careful not to cut the elevator. Alright, so if you look at it from the side, your elevator can move down. It can also move up. Looks like my glue has got things kind of bound up. There we go. Here, now it's free. Now I'm going to test fit the vertical stabilizer. Skewer, of course, will go in that hole. And the tail will be squeezed together right there on the end. Okay, I'm happy with my test fit. So I'm going to pull my rudder out of the way. I want to make sure that I'm centered. And I'm going to apply a small amount of glue on either side. I'm not going to go crazy with the glue probably until later. I want to make sure that I don't need to make an adjustment this way or this way once I install my main wing. So again, just a small amount of glue. I'm going to wipe away the excess. I'll let that cool down and then we'll install the vertical stabilizer. Now that that's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to apply a bead of glue from the hole all the way back. There you go. I'll line up the barbecue skewer to the hole. And I'm going to hold this in place vertically until the glue has had time to cool. Now that that's cooled down, I'm going to apply a small amount of glue right inside here on this side and some on the other side. And then I'm going to pinch the two halves together. I might have to roll the fuselage one way or the other just slightly. You can see where there's just a little bit of movement there. I may have to roll it so that the vertical stabilizer is perfectly vertical. I'm going to hold this for 2 full minutes. I want to make sure that this has had plenty of time to cool. For this portion of the build, we're going to be using this style control horn. Notice that it does not have the pill-shaped slot. Once that's cooled down, let's flip this upside down, and we're going to go ahead and add some control horns. Using the sharp end of a barbecue skewer, let's run that inside this slit. It's going to open things up just a little bit. I'm going to flip my barbecue skewer around, open things up a bit more. I'm going to install my control horn, and I'm going to do a test fit. I'm going to position my control horn where the hole is directly above the hinge. That looks good. I'll put my finger here and mark it. I'm going to fill the slit full of glue and put the control horn back in its place. Okay, it looks positioned good. I'm going to put a little bit more glue along the edge. Let that cool down, and then we'll do the rudder. Alright, the rudder's done in similar fashion. We'll first use the sharp end of the barbecue skewer, open that slit up a little bit, flip it around, open it up a little bit more, install the control horn, and position it where the hole is right above the hinge. I want to make sure that the control horn isn't making contact with the fuselage. And you can see when I flex it, it's making contact. So I'm going to take my razor blade and I'm going to open this up just a little bit more for clearance. Let's reinstall it. Now that looks good. Pull it out, apply some glue, and reinstall the control horn. Position looks good. I'm going to add a little bit more glue and let that cool. Now I'm going to trim the push rod housing. I'm going to cut it off at 18 inches. I'm going to mark approximately 18 inches with my finger, and using a pair of scissors, I'm going to cut the coffee stirrer. Make sure you do not use wire cutters because you might accidentally cut the push rod. I'm going to cut the other one off to the same length. Now that I've got the push rod housings cut, I'm going to cut the push rods to the correct length. Next I'm going to add a Z-bend. Adding a Z-bend is really easy. I'm going to grab the very end of the control rod, bend it down, go back just a little bit, and bend it up. Let's do the same on the other side. Well, you can see I bent one up and one down. It doesn't affect a thing. Now let's add some servos. For this build we're going to be using the Flite Test 9-gram servos. You'll notice that we're using the single arm. Flite Test servos come centered from the manufacturer. Install the servo arms as shown here. I'm starting with the rudder servo. I'm going to pass it through the outermost hole on the servo arm. I'm going to scratch the surface of the servo before I glue it in place. This will make sure that the glue sticks. I'm going to position the servo where the top of the arm is just below this surface. I may need to slide my servo either backwards or forwards. As the glue cools, I'm going to be watching here in the back to make sure that the rudder is perfectly straight. My test fit looks good, so I'm going to apply glue. And I'm going to hold this in place for a full 2 minutes. I want to make sure that this servo does not move. Now we'll do the same thing on the elevator. I'm sliding the push rod through the outermost hole. I'm positioning it where the top of this is just below the surface here. Just like on the rudder, I might need to slide it forward or backwards. When I glue this in place, I want my elevator perfectly neutral. Ratchet up just a little bit. And I'm looking back at the horizontal stabilizer, making sure that it stays neutral. Just like on the other side, let this cool for a full 2 minutes. One last thing I want to do is I want to stiffen up these push rod housings just a little bit more. And I'm going to take a piece of scrap from one of the formers, and I'm going to apply glue here, here, and here. And I'm going to lay this piece of scrap right across and hold it in place while it cools down. Let that cool for a minute and a half, and then we're going to install the scoop. In order to do the scoop, remove these 4 parts from your kit. You've got these 2 and these 2. What I'm going to do is test fit this piece right here. The exact fit on these 2 parts are not critical, except for here at the back where the corner is even with the edge of the skin. My test fit looks good, so I'm going to apply glue. Hold that in place for about 45 seconds, and then we'll do the other side. Once that's glued in place, I'm going to go ahead and install this one. And you can see I've got a reference mark here and here. And we'll line those up to the edge of the skin. Also, I'm shoving this up against this former. So I'm going to apply glue below these 2 crop marks and on the edge right here. Let that cool for a minute and a half and do the same thing on the other side. Once this is cooled down, it's time to glue the scoop on. On an earlier step, we made a cut along the edge of the intake. I wanted a perfectly straight edge. We're going to have to do the same thing on the fuselage now. Now the distance between here in here is 11 3/4 of an inch. Using a straight edge, I'm going to line up the ruler along the edge of this skin, and you can see that this skin is about 4.5 inches long. I want to make sure it's lined up exactly. Now I'm going to make a mark using a razor blade at 11 3/4. And now I'm going to make a cut from this corner up to that mark at 11 3/4. This is going to give me a perfectly straight line. Okay, once that's done, I'm going to do a test fit. There, you can see how nicely the two edges come together. That's going to look really good. Let's flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. Clean this up just a little more. That'll look nice. To install the scoop, I'm first going to glue between here and here. The test fit looks good. Apply glue to these liners. I'm going to hold this in place for a full 2 minutes. I prefer holding it in place with my fingers rather than applying tape. Tape can sometimes pop loose, and then you're going to have a great big gap. Getting this portion of the scoop lined up is critical. Everything in front of this will be hidden either by the wing or by the fairing. Now we're going to close in the other side. I'm going to add a piece of tape. This is going to help me hold it in place while the glue cools. I'm going to apply glue to the bottom of the D1 former, and then I'm also going to apply glue all along these liners and then the edge of the former as well. Once I apply glue, I'm going to position the other side of the scoop. I'm going to maintain pressure for a full 2 minutes. I'm applying pressure with my hand right above the D1 former. As it cools down, I'm making sure that this seam remains closed. Once that's cooled down, we're going to apply glue to this other liner, and then we're going to pinch this closed. Look at the test fit. That looks really good. You'll notice that I put a piece of scrap foam below. I'm concerned about getting dents in the fuselage, so if you've got an extra piece of foam, you can put it down. If you've got some newspaper, that'll do it. If not, just make sure your tabletop is cleaned. Before gluing this, make sure that you've removed tape from the inside. I had a little bit here and here. Just double check that because the glue won't stick if there's tape. I'm not putting any glue on top. I'm trying to roll it over just a little bit. I'm going to apply pressure and hold this in place for 2 full minutes. Again, I'm not relying on tape. I'm just using pressure from my fingers. Let's do the same on the other. We'll let this cool for 2 minutes, and then we're going to make the canopy. Go ahead and remove these 4 parts from your kit. These parts will make up the canopy. Start by removing paper from one side. All the parts are symmetrical, so it doesn't matter which side you remove paper from. We'll add a little bit of shape to each part. We'll do each part the same way. Now we're going to glue all 4 parts together. When I do a test fit, I'm getting a little bit of a gap. I'm going to remove a little bit of foam from the leading edge. I want to get some tape ready. I'm going to try to go halfway around. I'll hold this in place for about 30 seconds, then I'll apply some tape and I'll be able to do the other half. I'm going to flip it over, apply glue to the skinnier piece. And I'll hold it in place for 30 seconds or so and then apply tape. So that's done. Let's test fit the next 2 parts. Again, I think I can do about half of it. Got a little bit of glue coming out, but it isn't too bad. I'm going to wait till it cools down and then I'm just going to roll it with my thumb. It'll break free. I'll flip it over and apply glue to the piece that's inside. I'm going to scissor it closed. And by doing that, it's going to shove that extra glue to the inside where it's not seen. I'll apply tape as soon as I can, and we'll do the last piece. The test fit looks good. I think I could probably do that in 1 pass, but I'm going to play it safe and do it in 2. I'm putting the 2 pieces together. I'm going to scissor it and push that glue to the center. I'm going to flip it over, apply glue right here, and finish it out. Let that cool for a couple minutes, and then we're going to remove tape all along the edge. We're going to add a bevel, and then we'll glue this in place on the fuselage. Remove all the tape from the edge of the canopy. Now remove the tape from the top of the fuselage. Always be careful when removing tape that you don't take a layer of paper with it when you remove it. You'll notice a small crop mark hanging out here by itself on the top of the fuselage. This indicates the start of the canopy. So I'm going to do a test fit. I'll lay the canopy on top and pinch the sides. You'll notice a pretty big gap at the front, and there's also a pretty good gap all along the edge. We're going to cut a bevel all the way around. You'll notice also that I've got a little bit of a gap right here where the glue is broken loose. Inspect everything before you glue it in place. If you need to go back and glue it, do so now. As the bevel gets cut, it's going to be a little bit different as we move around the edge of the canopy. Here in the back, we're going to be holding the razor blade fairly flat. As we transition to the side, the razor blade is going to be more vertically. As we come around to the front, the razor blade is going to be flat again. So on the front and the back, the razor blade is going to be flat. On the sides, it's going to be more vertical. I'm going to do my best to show you what I'm talking about. Let's test fit this again. I'm looking at the crop mark in the front, and I'm making sure my canopy is centered left to right. There's a crop mark here in the rear that I'm also watching to make sure that the canopy is centered left to right. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm going to roll the canopy over, and I'm going to apply glue to the bevel all the way around. We're going to do this in one shot. Now that I've got the canopy pushed down and in place, I'm squeezing side to side, right along the edge of the canopy where the glue is. Checking both sides to make sure it hadn't slid one way or the other. Let this cool for a full 2 minutes before moving on. Once that's cooled down, grab this piece from your kit. We're going to add this to the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer. Test fit looks good. We're going to be gluing it here and all along the top of the fuselage. There's a crop mark right here that you can use for alignment. Hold that in place 45 seconds. That'll give it plenty of time to cool. If you decide to build the B or C model P-51 Mustang, remove the following pieces from your kit. You're going to need 3 skins. These are labeled G1, G2, and G3. Also remove the following formers. You'll have one former marked BC1, you'll have 2 formers marked BC2, and 3 formers marked BC3. Let's start by gluing the 3 BC3 formers together. When gluing them together, make sure that the center slot lines up perfectly and the holes line up perfectly. When applying glue, make sure you don't get glue close to the holes. We're going to be passing the push rod housings through the holes later. If they're full of glue, it makes it very difficult. Once that's done, let's glue the two BC2 formers together. The BC1 former is going to glue to the two BC2 formers like this. Just make sure that the slot lines up and the holes line up. Once that's done, set the formers off to the side, and we're going to peel paper from one side of each of these three skins. You'll want to tear the side that has the label on it. I want to start with the G3. This is the hardest part, so let's get it out of the way. I want to grab my BC3 former. You'll notice that as we add shape, most of the shape is going to be done right down the center and then down here on the corners. The sides have a little bit of shape, but for the most part they're flat. So as we're forming this, you'll notice that we're going to be spending most of our time here, here, and here. Let's start here in the middle. I'm going to start with just gently bending it down right in the middle. I'm not going to go too far. There's a point here at the back of the skin, and I'm going to pivot just slightly on that point. And I've moved it about, a half inch. I'm going to bend it just slightly again. Pivot back on this point here at the back. Go the half inch on the other side for this center mark. Add a little bit of a bend. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my right hand here at the back. I'm going to pivot it just slightly back and forth. I'm just wanting to add shape from here and taper as I go back. I'm only working an area about an inch wide, maybe just a little bit more. Okay, you can see how that wraps around the former. I'm going to add a little bit of shape from about here to here. Okay, I'm going to flip it around and do the same on the other side. I'm going to wrap that around the former and see if that shape looks good. Okay, that isn't bad. So now we're going to form the corner up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend this just slightly. You can see I'm pressing in. What I want to do is I want to create an indentation on the inside of the foam. And that'll show me where I need to create a bend. Do one on that side also. So you can see three lines in there, and right about here is where I want to form the crease. Put that on the edge of the table. Here at the back, I've got a little over 1/4 inch hanging over the edge of the table. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bend this 90 degrees. I'm using my fingertips to hold it down in the palm of my hand to bend it to 90 degrees. Once that's done, I'm going to put it on top of the table and begin flexing it. I'm going a little more each time, being careful not to crinkle the foam. I'm going to take and fold it all the way over. I'm going to hold it like this for about 30 seconds. That's going to break down the foam and it'll hold its shape at that point. Once that's done, let's do the other side. Looking for my mark about here. And again, you can see here at the back, there's just over a 1/4 inch. And I'm going to make a bend. Hold that in place. It's going to look really good. And go ahead and tear off several pieces of tape. I want to start by putting these two edges together and running a piece of tape close to the small end, right across that seam. I want to make sure that these two edges line up. You can see that it's off by just a little bit. That looks better. I'm going to run a bead of glue from here to about here. I'm not going to go all the way to the tape. Now notice I'm pressing down right on the seam. I want to make sure that the edges are flat against one another. Got a little bit of excess glue. I'm going to get some scrap and remove the excess glue. And I'll tape the seam anywhere it looks good. Now I'll remove the tape from the tail. I'll do the same here at the tail. I got a little bit too much glue in there. Press straight down on the seam and pull that tape tight all the way to the end. Just put our former in there. You can see that I was off on my bend, but that's okay. It isn't real critical. As I'm trying to push that in there, fits there at the bottom, there's no way I'm going to get the top in, and that's because of the taper. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to add a bevel to the back of this former. Let's see if that's enough. Slides in good. I'm going to make sure that my crop mark lines up exactly with my seam. And when I glue the former in place, I want to make sure that there's one layer of foam sticking out all the way around. You can see that there's a little bit of a gap all the way around the former. This is going to vary from kit to kit ever so slightly. If there is a gap, once you run glue, you can squeeze it where the gap is even all the way around. I'm going to add a bead of glue right where the former meets the skin. I'm going to wipe away the excess, and this is really important to do because if you don't wipe away the excess, the next skin won't fit correctly and you'll have gaps. We'll let this cool down for 1.5 minutes before going on to the next step. Once it's cooled down, we're going to form the part labeled G2. G2 is going to span between BC3 and the BC2 with the BC1 former up front. You'll notice that we're going to need to add shape primarily along the top, like we did on this tail section. So I'm going to move over to the edge of the table, and I'm going to work an area from here to about here. The sides of the formers are pretty flat, but I am going to add just a little bit of shape going all the way to the edge. Once that's done, I'm going to tear off a piece of tape about 10 inches long. So you can see what I've done there is I've created a shape that will allow me to easily position the formers when I glue them in place. I'm going to do a quick test fit. That looks good there in the back. And test fit up front looks good as well. I'm going to glue the larger former first. A couple things to note as I'm gluing it in place. Once the skin is glued in place, there will be one former sticking out. Also, I want to make sure that my crop marks are lined up exactly at the top. I'm going to get a couple pieces of tape on standby. And I'm applying glue to both layers. Wipe away the excess. Make sure my crop mark is lined up, that I only have one layer of foam sticking out, and I'll hold that in place. You can add a piece of tape on either side to help you hold it. And while that's cooling down, I'll flip it around. Do one more quick test fit. And make sure that I don't have tape hanging over the edge. Gotta be careful not to tear paper away also. It looks like I removed a little bit of paper. Add a little glue where that paper came up. Before I add glue, I'm going to get some tape. And I'm going to add glue all the way down to the corner. All the way around. And stop there at the corner. Check my alignment at the top, that looks good. Put a piece of tape there. And a piece of tape here where the seam looks good. And do the same on the other side. We'll set this off to the side and let that cool down, and we'll begin forming part labeled G1. Just like the others, most of the forming is going to be done right down the center. So we'll start by doing that. And like on the others, I'm going to add a little bit of shape going all the way to the edge. Tear off a piece of tape about 10 inches long, like we did on the center section. And we'll fold it over and tape it like that. Once that's done, we're going to attach G1 to the nose that we built earlier. We're going to do a test fit, and you'll notice that we've got formers sticking out. I'm going to line up that center crop mark. I'm going to push the two pieces together, check my fit. I'm also going to squeeze slightly side to side. This is going to make an indentation on the inside of the skin. This will show us where we need to apply glue. So you can see the indentions. When we glue this piece on, we're only going to glue from here up to the center mark. And then we'll come back and glue the other side. Before we glue everything together, let's tear off several pieces of tape. And I'm going to add glue to the formers. If you want, you could add glue to the skin where the marks are. It doesn't really matter. You can see I'm lined up at the top, and I'm going to add a piece of tape right there. Push the edges together and add a piece of tape. I'm going to add a little bend right there at the point. Put a piece of tape across there. You see I've got a little slack in my tape. I'm going to peel this off and re-tape it. That's tight. We'll let that cool down for a minute and a half, and then we'll do the other side. As that's cooling down, go ahead and tear off a few pieces of tape. Make sure the edges go together okay. And I'm going to peel this tape back. This will help me get glue in a little better. So I'm primarily going to be applying glue down here to the skin, and as I come around I'll have a little better access to the former. Add a piece of tape to the top first and work my way to the end. I'll wrap this tape back around, and while that's cooling down, I'm going to test fit this over the BC1 former. Pull the tape away, and be careful when I peel it off not to take the paper with the tape. Got to loosen the tape a little bit. Loosen that even more. Now what I'm looking for is I've got a crop mark here at the top, and you'll see a crop mark on the taller former. That's what you're going to use for alignment. Make sure my edges go together nicely before we glue. That looks good. I'm going to tear off a couple more pieces of tape. I'm going to apply a heavy bead of glue all along the side, top, and other side. I'm using a lot of glue, so I'll have plenty of time to get this in position. crop mark looks good. Push that together. That seam looks good right there. I've got a little excess glue. Remove that. Checking my alignment one more time. And I'll tape this in place. I'll put a little bead of glue right here at the top in the center. This will all be hidden by the canopy, so that won't show. Let that cool down, and then we're going to add the push rod housings. Now we're going to run our push rod housings. We need to feed them through the holes in this first former, and then also the hole through the second former. Once we do that, there's going to be 2 small slots towards the back of the aircraft. I'm going to feed the push rod housing all the way through. Should be able to guide it through this pill-shaped slot and push it. Once I've got the push rod housing poked through like this, I'm going to add a little bit of glue. I'm going to allow the glue to fully cool before I flip over and do the other side. If I don't, this is going to run out and make a mess. Once that's cooled down, let's do the other one. I'm going to use a section of push rod to catch the opening in the housing, so that'll help me guide it through the hole. Okay, once that's through, we're going to add glue like we did on the other side. We'll let that cool down. As that's cooling, grab this piece from your kit. This is going to be a spar that'll run the length of the fuselage. This gives the plane a whole lot of strength, and it's a great place to mount servos for the elevator and the rudder. Let's start by taking the back of a razor blade and running it down each of the scores. Break it open and tear out the centerpiece. I'm going to fold it over on itself. I'm going to apply a bead of glue down the middle, and I'll apply glue to one side or the other. I'll fold it over and glue it in place. Make sure it stays good and flat. Let that cool for 1.5 minutes, and then we'll do the install. Now that that's cooled down, we need to install this spar. And you'll notice that this is slanted downward. This is going to get fed in through the back of the fuselage. Once it feeds all the way through, you're going to see a notch up here at the front. Line it up with the notch and push down. Make sure when you push that your supporting hand is underneath a former. If you do it where there's no former, you're going to crinkle the foam. Alright, test fit looks good. I'm going to lift this up just a little bit. Pry it off to the side and apply glue in that notch. Push that down. Now I'm going to apply a little bit of glue where the spar passes through the former here and here. I'm just putting a heavy bead here at the top and letting gravity do the rest. While I'm at it, I'm also going to add glue where the push rod housings pass through the formers. While that's cooling down, you'll see that I've got one push rod housing that's slightly longer than the other. I'm going to cut the other one off approximately the same length as the short one. If you have tape right here, go ahead and remove it. You'll notice that we've got a pretty long span right here. One thing that I'm always concerned about is having too much flex in the push rod. So in order to stiffen things up a little bit, I'm going to take a piece of scrap. This was a piece of scrap that I got from one of the formers, and I'm going to glue it here on this center spar, and I'm going to glue the push rod housings to it. That'll eliminate most of the flex in this area. I'm going to add a heavy bead of glue to both of the push rod housings along with the center spar. And I'm going to drop this scrap right on top. I'm going to lift the push rod housings up just slightly while the glue cools. It's a little bit tricky. You may just have to do one at a time. Once that's cooled down, we're going to begin working on the scoop. Remove the following pieces from your kit. These will be labeled I2, I3, I4, and I5. Let's start with removing paper from the side with the label. I want to start by shaping I5. You'll notice that there's an area right here. This is the transition from the side to the bottom. What we're going to do is we're going to run a fold between here and about a 1/4 inch from this corner. I'll put this over on the edge of the table, and I'm going to fold it down. The scoop is kind of boxy in the back, so this is going to give us the shape we're looking for. Do the same on the other side. I'm going to fold that over. That looks good. You'll see that I've got a little bit of foam poking out here on the leading edge. I'm going to take and remove that with a razor blade. This will ensure that there's no gap when we glue the next piece onto it. This is I4. I'm going to match it up. And I see that I need to bend it about right here. And I can see that there's a peak right here. It doesn't have to be precise, just close. Let's do a test fit. It's lining up okay. Okay, looks like about there. I want to get several pieces of tape ready. I'm going to do my tape a little bit differently this time. I'm going to put one single piece of tape down, and I'm just going to cut some strips. Having little strips like this helps whenever we're making shapes like we're about to make. When we put each of these sections together, we're going to do this in 3 parts. I'm going to start with the edge, I'm going to pay very close attention to get this lined up as best I can. I'm going to hold the two pieces together for about 30 seconds. At that point, the glue's cooled down enough that I can put a piece of tape in place and that'll hold it, and then I can move on to the next section. What I like doing is putting a piece of tape right here and wrapping it around. Now I'm going to flip the part over and I'm going to apply glue from about here to here. I'll push that together and hold it for about 30 seconds, and then I'll put a piece of tape in place. I'll flip the part upside down, apply glue to I4, flip it back over, and I'm going to bend it, and when I bend it, those edges will come together. I'll push that together and hold it for about 30 seconds, and then I'll put a piece of tape in place. Let's let this cool for a full minute and a half, and then we'll put I3 on. Once that's cooled down, let's take I3 and let's determine where it needs to have some shape added. Looks like about there. Check the other side. I need to adjust where I bent it just a little bit. Again, you don't have to be exact, just get it close. That looks good. Just like before, hold it for about 30 seconds. After that, you'll probably be able to get a piece of tape to hold it in place. I'm going to roll the part upside down. I'm going to push I3 in just a little bit with my finger and apply glue. We'll push these two pieces together. So I've got a little bit of excess. Get a piece of scrap and wipe that away. Flip it over and push I3 in. Before moving on, I'm going to get a little bit more tape staged. Now you'll notice that I2 has a couple little tick marks. These are actually going to be facing forward. I2 is done the same way all the other parts are done. Once that's had time to cool, we're going to trim off some excess from the scoop. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on the edge of the table and I'm going to press the side down flat. You can see that the scoop is wrapped around the table's edge. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to run the ruler from the tip where this piece of paper is up to this crop mark. Even with a little variation in the way this scoop went together, when we make this cut, this will make sure that the part is perfectly straight. So whenever we install it onto the fuselage, it'll be a perfect fit. So you can see I've got my ruler right at the edge of the paper where it tapers down to nothing, and I've got this other end of my ruler lined up with a crop mark. Carefully make a cut. Watch your fingers on this step. Now we'll roll it over and do the same on the other side. Alright, there we go. Now let's set this part off to the side. We need to install the rudder, the elevator, and the servos before installing the scoop. For this step you'll need the following. For this step you'll need a couple barbecue skewers, a couple control horns, a horizontal stabilizer, and the vertical stabilizer. Let's start by using the back side of our razor blade and running down the scores on the vertical stabilizer. And let's run down the score on the horizontal stabilizer. There's also one right here. All right, once that's done, let's break open this part on the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer and tear it away. And break open the rudder. I'm going to add a bevel to the rudder using a ruler as a guide and holding my blade about 45 degrees. I'm going to draw my blade across the ruler. I'm going to add a bead of glue right along that bevel. Using a piece of scrap, I'm going to remove the excess glue. This adds a ton of strength to the hinge. Once that's done, we're going to put a barbecue skewer on the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer to give it some strength. So I'm going to come down here, a little over a ½ inch, and using a razor blade, I'm going to put pressure on the barbecue skewer and roll it. And then I can break it. Alright, once that's done, put the barbecue skewer in place. We're going to glue it on the leading edge, put a little glue on this flap, and then roll it around. I push straight down, and now I'm going to roll it all the way over and slide the rudder. Put my ruler on top while it cools down, and our reinforcement is done. Cut off a little bit of excess. And we'll set this part off to the side and begin work on the horizontal stabilizer. Let's fold the horizontal stabilizer all the way back, and let's add a bevel all along this seam. Add a bead of glue like we did before. And remove the excess. Make sure it stays open until the glue is fully cooled down. Once that's done, we're going to take a push rod and we're going to slide it up underneath this piece of paper inside the score. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the control rod all the way across. I'm delaminating the paper from the foam. I'm only going in about 1/4 of an inch. Do it one more time. Once that's done, I'm going to fold this piece of paper back all the way along this score. I'm going to use my ruler and draw it backwards, and this will give me a nice clean fold. There we go. I'm going to take the sharp end of my skewer and I'm going to run it right down this score. I'm going to flip my skewer over using the dull side and press all the way down to the table, and I'm going to open up that score. Now we need to get the barbecue skewer to lay down inside. First thing you need to do is cut the barbecue skewer to length. So I'm lining up one side and the other, marking it with my finger and thumb. And we're going to cut this barbecue skewer. Got pressure applied to the razor blade, and I'm going to roll the barbecue skewer back and forth. This razor blade will saw through, and you can break it off easily. Next, we need to get the barbecue skewer inside this score. And the way I found to do it is I lay my ruler with the metal side down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed this barbecue skewer in. And you'll notice that it's kind of disappearing inside that cavity. I'm going to keep downward pressure on my ruler as I run this barbecue skewer in. It's going to make sure it stays right where it needs to. Once that's done, we're going to apply a bead of glue here, and then we're going to fold this piece of paper over with our ruler. And try to keep my ruler out of the glue. You can see I had a little excess up here on this end. I'll wipe it away using a piece of scrap. And I'll keep downward pressure on my ruler until the glue has had time to cool down. Now that the horizontal stabilizer and vertical stabilizer are complete, we're going to cut a slot for the horizontal stabilizer. I'm going to pinch the two edges together. I want to make sure that I'm not crinkling it, but I want these edges as close as possible. Holding my razor blade horizontally, I'm going to play connect the dots. I'll do the same on the other side. Once that's done, I'll run the horizontal stabilizer through the slot. I'm keeping a little bit of pressure between my finger and thumb. That'll help the horizontal stabilizer slide in place. I'm looking at it from the top and making sure it's centered. Right here and right here, you can just make out the hinge for the elevator. I'm going to make a cut right here through this skin and remove this back piece. I'm being careful not to cut the hinge on my elevator. You can see I've got movement going up, and with this relief I've got movement down without any interference. Once that's been cut off and you check to make sure there's no interference, we're going to glue the horizontal stabilizer in place. I'm going to add a bead of glue here and here. I'm going to use a very light bead of glue. I just want to hold it in place. Once we get the main wings glued in place, we may need to change the position just slightly. I'm going to wipe away the excess. Let's test fit the vertical stabilizer. Skewer, of course, will go through the hole. Here on the bottom, I'm going to pinch the back closed. This will secure the bottom of the vertical stabilizer. Now that I've done a test fit, I'm going to pull that off and run a bead of glue from the hole all the way to the back where I made the cut. I'm going to hold this in place for about a minute while it cools down. I want to make sure that it's perpendicular to the horizontal stabilizer. Now that that's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to apply a small bead of glue to the edge of the vertical stabilizer right here. I'll do that on both sides. I want to make sure I don't get it into the hinge. Once I get glue in there, I'm going to pinch it closed right at the end, and I'll let it cool for a minute and a half. For this portion of the build, we're going to be using this style control horn. Notice that it does not have the pill-shaped slot. Now that that's had a chance to cool down, we're going to install the push rods and the control horns. There's a slit here at the bottom of the rudder. I'm going to take the sharp end of a barbecue skewer and run it through that slit. It's going to open things up a little bit. I'm going to flip it around and open that hole all the way up. I'm going to run the push rod through the control horn and do it this way. And I'm going to feed it through the push rod housing. Once I do that, I'm going to glue the control horn in place. First, I'm going to do a test fit. I want to make sure that the hole is right above the pivot point. Once I'm happy with position, I'll pull the control horn out, put some glue in the slot, and reinsert the control horn. Again, I'm double checking that the hole is directly above the hinge. That looks good. And I'm going to put a small bead of glue along the control horn where it meets the rudder. Now we'll flip it over and do the elevator. Just like before, I'm going to run a barbecue skewer down the slot with the sharp end, flip it over, and open it up a little bit more. Feeding the push rod through the housing like we did with the rudder. Once that's pushed through, we're going to test fit the control horn. Just like with the rudder, I want to ensure that the hole is directly above the hinge. That looks good. Pull that out. Apply glue and reinstall the control horn. I'll run a little bit of glue down the edge like we did on the rudder. Make sure that doesn't shift while it's cooling. Give that about 45 seconds and then we'll begin doing the install of the servos. For this build we're going to be using the Flite Test 9-gram servos. You'll notice that we're using the single arm. All Flite Test servos will come from the factory pre-centered. You'll notice that I've got the arm pointing straight up on both. I've got both the push rods all the way through the push rod housings. You'll notice that I just have a little bit of the push rod sticking out. Using a pair of scissors, I'm going to cut the push rod housing right about here. Make sure on this step you do not use wire cutters. You don't want to accidentally cut the push rod. The two sides don't have to be exactly the same length. I'm just going to leave this one long. Now we're going to make a Z-bend. Z-bends are extremely easy. We're just going to make two 90-degree bends. Bending it 90 degrees back. Grabbing the wire at the bend, and now I'm going to bend it forward. Let's do the same on the other. Bend it 90 degrees back. Grab it right behind the bend, bend it 90 degrees forward. Now I'm going to run the Z-bend through the outermost hole on the servo arm. I'm going to position it on this spar, and as I position it, I'm looking back at the horizontal stabilizer. I want to make sure it's not tilted up or down. I need to make sure it stays in the neutral position. So my test fit looks good. My servo is going to be right around this area. Before I glue it in place, using a razor blade, I'm going to scratch the surface of the housing with a razor blade. This will help the glue stick really well. Apply a heavy bead of glue. And stick the servo in place. As the servo is cooling down, I'm making sure that the elevator is in the neutral position. I might have to slide my servo forward or backwards to keep the elevator in the neutral position. Once it's neutral, I'm going to hold the servo in place for a full 2 minutes while the glue cools down. Now we'll install the rudder servo. Again, we're going to go through the outermost hole. And we'll check position. Sliding it back and forth till I get it in the neutral position. That looks good. I'm going to scratch the surface. Apply glue. And stick it in place. Okay, the rudder looks neutral. I'm going to hold it here for 2 full minutes. Before installing the scoop, we'll first need to glue plates to the inside of the fuselage. Remove these 2 plates from your kit. You'll notice a crop mark here and one at the back. Plates are going to be slid in and glued in place. The reference marks will be even with the bottom of the skin. I'm going to slide the plate all the way towards the nose of the aircraft when I glue it in place. Hold that in place for a full minute. I want to make sure that a gap doesn't appear here in the middle. Once that cools down, we'll do the other side. Do a quick test fit. Everything looks good. I'm going to apply glue just like I did before. I'm also going to put a bead of glue here on the front. I forgot to do that on the first one, but that's all right. We'll add glue down the seam here in just a minute. Okay, I've got the crop marks lined up, and I'm pushing the plate towards the nose of the aircraft. And just like on the other side, we'll let that cool down for a minute. Because I forgot to apply glue to the leading edge of this plate, I'm going to run a bead of glue down right now. Alright, once that cools down, we're going to go ahead and add the scoop. In order to get the scoop to fit really well, you'll remember we made a cut all the way along here. We had a nice straight edge. And if I hold it up to the fuselage, you'll see that there's a big step right here that's going to be in our way. So before we test fit this, I'm going to place a straight edge right along this skin. And you can see on my ruler here, I've got 11 3/4 of an inch right here where these two skins come together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a razor blade and I'm going to cut this step off. And again, I have got the edge of my ruler right along the edge of this skin. And I'm going to go all the way down, and we're going to cut this at 90 degrees. We're just going to take a little bitty square off of this. So again, we have a 11 3/4 inch straight edge. That'll allow this to fit in and fit really well. I'm going to do the other side. Again, I'm going to line that up, and I'm going to cut up to 11 3/4. Okay, once that's done, we'll be able to test fit the scoop. You'll see that I've put a piece of foam on top of my tabletop. We're going to be applying quite a bit of pressure, and I want to avoid having any dried glue or something on the table causing dents on the bottom of this surface. Those two straight edges come together, and that's going to fit really nicely. Now you can see that there's big gaps all the way down here. This part is under a lot of tension, and so I'm only going to glue from this first seam back. So I'm going to double check one more time that my fit looks good. Alright, I'm going to apply glue all over this plate from about here to here. Using my fingertips, I'm going to hold this in place for 2.5 minutes. I don't want to use tape here because tape can actually pop loose and you'll have a great big gap. Now that that's cooled down, we're going to go ahead and glue the rest in place. I'm going to start out by putting a piece of tape right along the edge of this skin. It's going to help me keep glue from getting all over the place. Also, I'm going to tear up a couple pieces of tape just in case I need them. I'm going to run a bead of glue all over this plate. While I'm holding this in place, I'm going to pull this piece of tape off. And you can see I've got a nice clean seam and no glue squirting up. Hold this for a good 2 minutes. I want to make sure the glue has had plenty of time to cool down. Now that that's cooled, let's do the other side. I'm going to start with putting a piece of tape right along the edge. Now I'm going to run glue right along that plate. Press down and hold for 2 full minutes. Now we'll go ahead and make the canopy. Remove these 3 parts from your kit. Start by tearing paper off of one side. It doesn't matter which side you tear, the parts are symmetrical. Let's start with the 2 smaller parts. We're going to add some shape to them. I want these rounded about like that. Okay, that looks good. Now, on this section, there's a corner right here, and there's a little point right here. What we're going to do is we're going to take and bend the part. And we'll do the same on this side. I'm lining up this corner and this point right here, and I'm going to bend it around. I am going to add a little bit of shape to the windscreen, but not a lot. One more thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit of shape right here. So we're just adding just a little bit of roundness. We'll do the same on this side. So you can see how much we've added. It isn't much. Now I'm going to glue these 2 pieces together like this. I'm making sure that this is flush here at the back. You can see I've got a nice gentle curve. Hold this in place for about 1.5 minutes and then we'll do the other side. Now I'm going to test fit this side. This piece is slightly overlapping this piece. I'm going to apply glue along here. And I'm going to overlap the piece that I just applied glue to. I'll hold that for about 1.5 minutes. After about 30 seconds, I can probably get a piece of tape there across the seam. Once it's cooled down, we're going to install the final piece. Let's test fit it. You'll see that it doesn't want to go down. So what we're going to do is we'll add a bevel here, here, and along the front. I'm not removing very much material, but it should be enough to make it fit. There, that looks good. We'll press that in and hold for about 1.5 minutes until the glue's had a chance to cool down. Once that's done, we're going to do a test fit. First, I'm going to remove some tape here on the top. Again, be really careful when removing tape. You don't want to pull paper away. So let's do a test fit. All right, my test fit looks good. You can see right here, I've got a pretty big step between the canopy and the fuselage. So I'm going to add a bevel. If you look here in the front, there's also a pretty big step. I'm also going to add a bevel in the front. When I add a bevel along the front, I'm going to be holding my blade pretty flat. When I'm cutting a bevel along the side, I'm going to be holding my blade more straight up and down. I'm going to do my best to show you. Going along the side, you can see that I'm holding my blade vertically. And as I transition to the front of the canopy, my blade is a lot flatter. Okay, let's check fit again. That looks really good. I'm going to apply glue along this back edge. I'm also going to apply glue right along the edge of this bevel that I cut all the way around. Making sure that it's centered. I'm going to press and hold using my fingertips for about 1.5 minutes. One last detail before we go on. We're going to add a little piece right here to the vertical stabilizer. So test fit looks good. I'm going to apply a little glue to the bottom and to the edge. It goes up against the vertical stabilizer. We'll glue that in place. At this point in the video, we've covered construction of both styles of fuselage, the earlier B and C model and also the D model. From this point on, all steps will be common to both styles of fuselage. Now we're going to build the wing assembly. Remove the following parts from your kit. You've got 2 upper wing skins, 2 lower wing skins, 2 wooden spars, and 4 foam spars. Let's start by taking the back of our razor blade and running it down each of the scores on the foam spars. Once that's done, break the spar backwards like this and tear away the center. Do the same on all 4. Once that's complete, we're going to fold this over on itself. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to run a bead of glue down this center channel, and I'm also going to run a bead of glue on one side or the other. Once that's done, I'll fold it back over and hold it in place for about 1.5 minutes. You'll repeat the same process on the remaining 3. Once that's done, set the spars off to the side and grab the 2 lower wing skins. We're going to glue the 2 halves together, just like this. I'm going to add a heavy bead of glue to one edge. When I glue the 2 halves together, I'm going to have the edge hanging off the table. This will prevent it from sticking to the tabletop. You'll notice I've got 4 cutouts. I want those facing down. You'll notice that I shingled the side without the glue over the side with the glue. You'll notice I don't have any glue squirting out. Hold this in place for 1.5 minutes and then we'll flip it over and go on to the next step. Now that that's done, we're going to pop out all these small rectangles. I've got 4 in the center, 2 on each wingtip. I'm using the dull side of a barbecue skewer. That seems to work best for removing these. With the knockouts removed, the next step is to install the spars. Lay your spars out the way I've shown here. You'll notice that the tabs are laying against the skin and they're facing each other towards the middle. Let's test fit each one. Okay, the fit looks good. I'm going to pull one out at a time and glue it in place. I'm going to fill each of these cavities with glue and then put a heavy bead of glue along the bottom of each spar. Once it's glued in place, keep pressure on the spar for a full minute and a half. Pay special attention to the spar near the wingtip. Make sure it's stuck down really good. We'll do the same on the remaining spars. Once the foam spars are glued in place, let's add the wooden spars. The wooden spars are going to fit on the outside of each of the foam spars. I'm lining up the point on the bottom of the wooden spar with the seam. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to add glue to half of the wooden spar. I'm going to hold that in place for a minute or so, and then I'll do the other. Again, I'm just going to add glue to half of the wooden spar, and I'll glue it in place. I'm double checking that the point on the wooden spar is centered over the seam. I'm going to hold that in place for a minute or so. Once that's cooled down, we're going to set the dihedral. To do this, we're simply going to push the wooden spars flat on the other side. I've got a roll of tape that I'm going to put under the wing to help hold the correct angle. I want to make sure that I can push the spars flat against the table to the right side of this point. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to add glue to this one. I'm going to push it down and hold this in place for about a minute and a half. Once that cools down, we'll do the same on the other side. To add glue, I'm going to pry the spar open just a little bit, put glue all along the foam spar. Let it spring closed, and I'm going to press straight down. Give that a minute and a half, and then we'll go on to the next step. For the time being, set this assembly off to the side. Now we're going to add some shape to the upper wing skins. It's important that you remove paper from the correct side. Here you'll see a cut, a score, and another cut. On this side you just see two cuts. It's important that you remove paper from the side that has the score. Once the paper is removed, flip the wing over. Fold the aileron all the way back on itself. Using a straight edge, position the ruler about 1/4 inch from the edge, and we're going to add a bevel. Once that's done, I'm going to add a bead of glue and then remove the excess with a piece of scrap. Once that's done, we're going to create an airfoil. Make sure that this aileron stays open while the glue is cooling down. In order to form the airfoil, I'm going to position the wing with about half of the wing hanging off the table. You'll notice this is the trailing edge of the wing facing me. Most of the shape is going to be on the front or the leading edge of the wing. This is formed the same way that we did when forming portions of the fuselage. I'm going to draw the wing back with my left hand while adding pressure with my right hand. Each time I draw the wing down, I'm going to move my right hand over just a little bit. By now, the ailerons had time to cool. I'm going to fold it down. I'm going to go back and repeat the process. Now that I've got a little shape added, I'm using both hands and applying a little bit more pressure. Now I've got about 2/3 of the wing hanging off the table. I want to add even more shape from about here all the way down to the wingtip. So I'm going to concentrate in this area. Now what I'm looking for is an exaggerated airfoil, and you can see that I've got that. So I'm really happy with the shape. The last thing I want to do is I want to add a bevel all along the leading edge. So I'm going to hold my blade pretty flat and cut a bevel along the entire leading edge. Once that's done, you can set the wing skin off to the side, and we'll do the same on the other half. Now that shape's been added to both wings, grab the lower wing assembly and we'll install the upper wing skins. We're going to do a test fit. And you'll notice, since we've exaggerated the airfoil, in order to get the wing skin to fit, we're going to have to push down and flatten it. This is really going to help keep everything in place whenever we go to glue it. When doing a test fit, I'm looking to make sure that the leading edge is lined up with the leading edge of the lower wing skin. I'm also looking to make sure that this corner lines up exactly. So the leading edge is going to help us align the wing forward and backwards, and this little corner right here is going to help us get alignment left and right. Everything looks good. I'm going to apply a very heavy bead of glue on this spar, and all the way along the leading edge of the wing. Make sure you've got plenty of glue. Have an extra glue stick on standby just in case you run out. I use a lot of glue here. I want to have plenty of time to get the wing in position. When I put the wing skin in place, I'm going to draw it backwards just a little bit. This will keep glue from squirting out the front. The leading edge of my wing looks good. Looks like I've got good alignment here. I'm going to keep even pressure on the wing skin while it cools down. Notice that I've got one finger right here in the corner. That area always wants to pop up. Allow plenty of time to let the glue fully cool down. Now that that's cooled down, I want to glue up the wingtip. First, I'm going to tear off 3 pieces of tape. And I'm going to apply a bead of glue right along the bottom of the upper wing skin. I'm going to take and pull the tape down and wrap it around the lower wing skin. And I'm going to apply tape to the top, pull it down, and wrap it around. And I'll do that on the 3rd piece as well. As that's cooling down, I'm going to flip the wing over. I'm going to tear off a couple pieces of tape. I'm going to run a bead of glue right along the back here. I'll attach to the upper wing skin, gently pull it around. I don't want to pull too hard and cause any deformation on the trailing edge. Do the same here, gently pull and tape. Now we'll flip it over and do exactly the same on the other side. Once that's done, let's add some servos. For the ailerons, we're also running the Flite Test 9-gram servos. Just like with the rudder and elevator, use the single arm. Install the servo arms as shown here. Let's start by attaching an extension to the servo. The actual extension included with the kit may vary in color. Notice that I've got the white running to the yellow and the black running to the brown. Do the same on the other as well. Once that's done, we're going to run the wire through the wing. You might have to hold the wing vertically, let gravity help the wire feed through. Once your wire is through, position your servo like I've got here, and I'm going to apply a bit of glue to each of the tabs. I'm also going to put a small line of glue on either side. Once that cools down, we'll do the same on the other side. Once that cools down, we'll connect the 2 extensions to a Y. Go ahead and add a Y extension at this point. Now let's flip the wing over and add the control horns and push rods. The control horns we're going to use for this are a little taller than the others. These are easily identified. There's a little pill-shaped slot there at the bottom. Let's start with running the Z-bend through the outermost hole on the servo arm. Using a pair of needle nose, I'm going to grab the control rod directly above the hinge. I'm going to bend it 90 degrees towards the center. I'm going to grab the wire I just bent right at the bend, and I'm going to bend the wire straight back. And I'll cut it off about 1/4 inch past the bend. Once that's done, using the sharp end of the barbecue skewer, I'm going to open up the slot a little bit and then flip the barbecue skewer over and open it up some more. We'll run the Z-bend through the hole and install the control horn. I want to make sure that my aileron is at the neutral position. You can see that it's a little bit off. So I'm going to move the control horn back just a little bit. And now you can see that it's at the neutral position. I'll remove the control horn, apply glue, and reinsert. I'm going to hold this in place while the glue cools down. I want to make sure that this does not move at all. Once that's done, let's flip the wing around and do the other side. Just like before, I'll run the Z-bend through the outermost hole. Swing it towards the back. Grab the wire right at the seam. Bend towards the center. I'm going to grab the wire I just bent there at the bend. Bend straight back. And cut off the excess about 1/4 inch past the bend. We'll open up the slot using the sharp end. I'll flip it around, open it up a little more. Feed the Z-bend through the hole in the control horn. Okay, position looks good. Add some glue and reinsert. And hold it in place while the glue cools down. I'm looking at this control horn and I notice that it's off to the right just a little bit. I'm going to cut away a little bit of material. This will give me the clearance I need so there's no interference. Your main wing is now complete. Now we're going to cut a slot in the fuselage. One of the biggest design challenges I ran into was creating a slot for the wing to fit in. We've got several pieces coming together. It made it very difficult to lay out the foam in a way that could repeatedly go together. So what I ended up coming up with was a template that lays on the side of the aircraft, and we're going to go around the template with an X-Acto knife, creating a wing slot. You'll notice on the fuselage that there's a hole here and one up towards the front. We're going to take a barbecue skewer and we're going to run it through the hole in the template and the hole in the fuselage. You'll notice that there's a little indicator arrow. The indicator arrow is facing the front of the aircraft. Once the template is lined up, very carefully take an X-Acto knife and trace the inside of the template. Don't worry about going through on your first pass. Once I've established a line, I'm going to pull out the skewers, remove the template, and I'm very carefully going to go over the line I made with the X-Acto. Really take your time with this step. This area is a little bit difficult because you're actually going through multiple layers of foam. Once you come to this front seam, just cut all the foam off there at the seam. I might get a razor blade because my X-Acto knife blade isn't quite long enough. Once that's done, we'll flip it over and do the same on the other side. Once your wing slot is cut on both sides, let's test fit the main wing assembly. Remove tape from this area on both sides. Installing the wing is a little bit tricky. Start by moving your wires out of the way. I've pulled both of the aileron wires towards the front. The front will have this U-shape cutout. I'm going to flip the fuselage upside down. The square notch will be facing the back of the aircraft. I'm going to squeeze the fuselage together to where it fits inside that square notch. I'm going to slowly start sliding the whole wing assembly backwards. And I'm checking on both sides to make sure that it's not catching where these seams come together. Once the wing is all the way back, I'm going to line things up here at the front. When we glue it in place, this U-shaped cutout needs to be centered exactly. Make sure it's not off to one side or the other. Make sure that all the tape's been removed. Looks like I've got a piece over here on this side I'll need to pull out. I'm going to slide my wing assembly back out and remove that piece of tape. Before going on, I'm noticing that my reinforcement plate has come loose. So I'm going to pull my wing assembly out and glue that in place before permanently installing my wing. I'll let that cool for a minute, check the other side, and then we'll reinstall the main wing again. I'm going to glue the plate on this side, just like I did on the other. And then we'll hold that for a minute while the glue cools. Now that that's cooled down, we'll install the wing again, and we'll check for any other issues. I'm going to roll the plane over. Okay, everything looks good. Making sure that none of my wires are sticking out on either side. Pull all my wires up. Flip it over this one last time. And I'm going to add a bead of glue right along here, an area from about here to here, and the same on the other side. Once I do that, I'll squeeze the wing and the fuselage together and allow the glue to cool. Just want to make sure that everything is centered up okay. If you have a little bit of glue that squirts out, or if you have a small gap, it's okay. We're going to be adding a fairing, and it'll cover the seam entirely. I want to point out that the palm of my right hand is resting on a former, and my fingertips are resting on a former. I want to make sure when I'm applying pressure that I'm always doing it above a former so I don't crinkle the foam. Hold this in place for a full 2.5 minutes. We do not want the wing to move. Now that the glue is cooled down right here, I'm going to run a heavy bead from one end all the way to the other. Again, we're going to have a fairing covering all this, so if the glue gets a little messy, it's no big deal. I'm going to do the same on the other side. While that's cooling down, I'm going to add a piece of Velcro to the bottom of the battery box. Right now we have really good access to this, but we're going to be closing it in here pretty soon. Now I'm going to check the alignment of the horizontal stabilizer and the rudder. I'm going to look straight down and to see if I need to make any adjustment. Okay, this looks good. Since everything looks good, I'm going to go ahead and add a bead of glue here along the bottom on both sides. I'm also going to add a bead of glue along the rudder on both sides. With that done, I'm going to flip the aircraft over. Let's build the accessory cover. The accessory cover consists of the following 4 parts. Go ahead and remove these from your kit. Start off by removing paper from this piece and paper from this piece. Let's start by adding some shape to the larger part. And let's see how this fits. Okay, that's going to look good. I'm going to add a bevel all the way around the edge. And I'm going to hold my blade as flat as possible. Okay, I like the way that fits. Now I've got the paper laying on the tabletop. I'm going to add a little bit of shape to this part. Notice the direction. Okay, that's going to fit right there. But before we do that, there's one part that's a perfect rectangle. We want the one that's not a perfect rectangle. We're going to glue it in place just like this. I want to make sure it's visually centered. Apply a bead of glue and glue it in place. Let's apply a bead of glue up on top. And we're going to drop this piece on. When you look at it from the front, it should look like this. While that's cooling down, I'm going to glue this piece on. And I'm going to run it up against this piece right here. And I've got that visually centered. Make sure that it stays curved like this as the glue cools. I'm going to hold it like this for about 1.5 minutes while it cools down. After that's cooled down, we're going to make a cut right here between this cutout and the wooden spar that spans between the 2 wings. What I'm wanting to do is cut an 1/8 inch slot right along this seam. It doesn't have to be a perfect 1/8 inch slot, just get it close. I'm going to run my razor blade back until it makes contact with the wooden spar. Once that's done, see this little T slot? I'm going to pinch the end of it just a little bit, and we're going to slide that in that slot we just made. If it feels a little too tight, you can open up this slot a little bit. We want it to slide back with a little bit of resistance. Once it goes all the way back, using your razor blade, make a cut following the line right here. Once that excess is cut away, you can press this down. So it looks like we can take off just a little more. I'm going to slide this out, and we'll remove a little bit more material from the front. Press it down and slide it forward. There's a real low profile accessory cover. And I've always had really good luck with that staying closed in flight. Now that we've got the door installed, let's finish up the intake. You can see that it looks really flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze this and make the sides a little bit taller. I like this right about here. Looks like my total width is about 3.5 inches. So I'm going to hold this in place, and I'm going to apply a bead of glue down either side. I'll hold that in place for about a minute, and then we're going to install I1. You'll want to go ahead and remove I1 from your kit. Now that that's cooled down, you'll see where I1 is written. We're actually going to tear off the side that doesn't have any writing. Once that's torn off, center that along the front of the intake. You're going to bend each side up about like this. This will get glued to the front edge of the intake. So what I'm first going to do is I'm just going to apply glue across the bottom, and I'm going to put a bead of glue about right here. I'm not going to worry about this side until the glue cools from the first pass. Hold that for a full minute and a half, and then we'll glue the remaining section. Once that's cooled down, apply glue here. And you can bend this over and finish the intake. Once that cools down, we're going to add the manifolds. Before going on to the next step, let's remove all the tape from the nose. As I've mentioned before, be very careful when peeling tape off not to remove paper underneath. For this next step, grab the following 4 parts from your kit. You'll notice on the nose you've got a crop mark here and one here. We're going to center this piece right between the two. You'll see that you'll have to put a slight bend right here in order for it to lay flat against the fuselage. Hold that in place for about 30 seconds, and then we'll do the same on the other side. One thing I want to point out before going on, if you intend to paint your aircraft, I generally leave the manifolds off until after I paint the airframe. I usually paint these brown or a rust color. Once I paint them and the airframe's been painted, then I'll go ahead and do the install. If you don't intend to paint or you're not worried about it, you can go ahead and install these now. To do the install, we're just going to apply glue to the flat side, and they'll mount right underneath this trim. let that cool down, and then we'll do the other side. Again, we're going to run a heavy bead of glue. Glue that in place. One of the last things we're going to do is form the wing fairings, and you'll notice right here that this has a reverse curve. So I'm going to show you how to get a reverse curve using foam. Here are two fairings. Lay them on the table like this and remove paper from one side. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add a bevel along this edge and this edge. It needs to be a very flat bevel. You can see that I've got my razor blade very flat compared to the table. There you go. You can see how wide of a bevel I've cut there. Now we'll do the same on the top. Be very careful when cutting towards you like this. Once you've got a bevel on both sides, I'm going to lay this on top of a can of spray paint with the paper down. I'm going to use a wrench to add shape to it. You can also use something like a Sharpie, but I actually prefer this smooth metal finish on this particular wrench. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run this back and forth right along the edge. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to crush the foam. And I'm going to continue to run it back and forth just along the edge a dozen times or more. And the more I run this back and forth, the more pressure I'm applying. Again, I am staying right along the edge. I'm going to flip it around and I'm going to do the opposite edge. And go back and do the other side. And after a while, I'm going to start slowly moving towards the middle. I'm not going to get in any hurry, but you can see that I've moved from the very edge. Now I'm concentrating in this area. Do the same over here. Now I'm moving towards the middle. You can see that the part is starting to take the shape of the can. And you can see we don't have any wrinkles. If you get a wrinkle somewhere around in here or here, you can put it on the can and really concentrate on that particular area. Sometimes it'll flatten back out. If not, it'll minimize the wrinkle. Just going to add a little bit of shape here on this end. I'm not worried about getting too much of a curve down on the skinnier side. All right. You can see that we've got quite a bit of shape. I'm going to set this part off to the side and we'll do the other one now. All right, removed a little bit of material, but I'm not happy with the bevel, so I'm going to go back and do it this way. I want to be real careful when I'm cutting towards myself not to let the razor blade slip. I don't want to get a cut. Now that my bevel looks good, we'll do the same on this piece. Once your fairings are formed, grab your aircraft and we'll go ahead and do the install. Let's start by lining it up. I want to make sure that I've got a good fit here in the back. You'll notice that this corner is flush with the trailing edge. You'll notice that it wraps around the wing without doing any binding. Alright, I'm happy with the position. I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and I'm just going to scribe a very light line right where the fairing meets the fuselage. I'm going to do it along the bottom. Okay, make sure I can see my line. Okay, I can make that out. What I'm going to do is put a bead of glue underneath the line on the fuselage and a bead of glue just to the inside of the line on the wing. Once that's done, I'm going to reposition my fairing to match up the line that I scribed and glue it in place. Let that cool for a couple minutes and we'll do the other side. Okay, that position looks really good. And we'll hold this in place a minute and a half while the glue cools. I'm going to trim off this little bit here in the front. There's a line on the wing and I'm just going to follow that line. Cut that off. Now let's flip it around and do the other side. Just like on the other side, we'll cut this end off. Now we'll add the last section on the nose. Remove the part from your kit labeled C1. Remove the paper from the side with the label on it. Alright, once that's done, we're going to add some shape to this. You don't want to use much pressure on a part this skinny. Feels like I got a little bit too much tension, so I'm going to do that one more time. And I'll get a piece of tape ready. Pinch that together and run a piece of tape across. As it's cooling, let's get a test fit. There's a small crop mark at the top on both parts. Line those two crop marks up. It looks like there's a little bit of foam sticking up all the way around. We're going to cut off that peak. You don't have to remove much. Once that's removed, tear off a long strip of tape and let's cut a bunch of small sections like we've done elsewhere. We're going to start here at the top and work our way around. With that, our airframe is complete. The only thing left to do is add the motor and hook up the electronics. The last thing needed to complete the aircraft is to add the motor. We're going to be running the Flite Test 2218 radial. We'll also be running the Flite Test 35 amp ESC. Remove the power pod from your kit. You'll notice that it's pretty small. It's shaped quite a bit differently than other power pods in other flight test aircraft. I cut it down because I wanted to make sure that I could put as big a battery as possible in this plane. The shape of the power pod will allow a wide range of batteries to be used. I've run 2250 milliamp batteries all the way up to a 5000 milliamp 4-cell battery. I'm going to move my electronics off to the side for the time being. Let's take a razor blade, and using the back side of the razor blade, let's go down each of the scores on the power pod. Let's break it over backwards and remove the piece in the middle. These are going to be an A-fold. On an A-fold, the side plates are above the base plate. I'm going to add glue here and here. I'm going to fold the sides up. We'll let that cool for about 45 seconds, and then we'll add the firewall. Once it's cooled down, we're going to add the firewall. Position the firewall where the rectangle is at the top left corner. I'm going to put a bead of glue around the entire edge. I'll glue the firewall in place. Let that cool for about a minute. Then we're going to run a piece of tape around the front. Adding tape is essential. It adds most of the strength that secures the firewall to the power pod. Once it's cooled, tear off about 6 inches of tape. Put the tape across the front. See, it's sticking up a little bit. Wrap it around. And using a razor blade, I'm going to cut it right at the corner. Do that on both sides. Fold the sides down. And fold this front flap down. Once that's done, I'm going to go around each of the holes with a razor blade. Make sure that you get all the tape removed from these two holes. When securing the motor to the firewall, we're going to be using this hole, this hole, this hole, and this hole. Once those are cleaned out, we'll attach the motor. To attach the motor, first run your wires through the square at the top left. Place the motor up against the firewall, and I'll line up one of the 4 holes. Using one of the wood screws supplied with the kit, and start the screw and run it about halfway down. Now go ahead and run the remaining 3 halfway down. I've run this screw all the way down. Now go ahead and run the remaining 3 all the way down as well. Now that the motor's secured, let's attach the ESC. Plug all 3 wires in. It makes no difference what order you plug them in. Once that's done, we need to check to make sure that the motor is spinning counterclockwise as you're looking at it from the front. In order to do this, we're going to hook the receiver up to the ESC and bind it to the transmitter. Let's go through the bind process. I've plugged the ESC into the receiver along with the bind plug. I'm going to plug the battery into the ESC. Now I'll power up the transmitter. First, we need to create a new model. I'm going to do that by hitting the clear and the back button. I'm going to scroll down to add new model and hit select. Scroll over to create, hit select. I'm going to scroll all the way down the system setup menu until I come to bind. I'm going to select bind, scroll over to bind, and I'm going to hit select. After I hit select, I'm going to move the transmitter about 3 feet away or more from the receiver, and the bind process should complete. Once you hear the startup chime, the bind sequence is completed. Make sure and remove your bind plug at this point. Now let's test the motor. I'm looking at it from the front, and I want to make sure that the motor is turning counterclockwise. Looks like we're turning in the right direction. If the motor would have been turning clockwise, the only thing needed is to switch any 2 of the 3 wires. With that complete, I'm going to tape the connections between the motor and the ESC, then we'll install the power pod. I've gathered up the ESC and the receiver, and I'm securing it with my thumb. I'm going to slide the power pod all the way in until it stops. Once it stops, I'm going to remove the accessory cover. Move the wires out of the way, and I'm going to push the plate from the power pod all the way down. Okay, that's all the way down. I'm making sure that my power pod is moved all the way back. I don't see a gap there between the former and the power pod. So that looks good. I'm going to drop a little bit of glue along the back side of the power pod where it meets up to the former. This is a little bit hard to show with the camera. Once that's done, I'm going to glue the front of the power pod in place. Now we're going to glue the power pod in up front. Notice that there's no gap between the power pod and the battery box. I'm going to apply a bead of glue along the side, the top, and the other side. Once that cools down, we'll get the servos plugged into the receiver and finish programming. Now that the power pod is glued in place, I'm going to use a push rod and I'm going to pull the ESC and receiver out through the opening. Once I've got all the wires pulled out, I'll get everything plugged into the receiver. This looks like my ailerons. Next one is elevator. And last but not least is the rudder. With that done, I'm going to connect the battery to the ESC. Now I want to check the direction of the control surfaces. Let's check the direction first. I'm going to check my elevator. When I pull this back, my elevator should go up. That looks correct. Now I'm going to check my aileron direction. When I move it to the right, my left aileron ought to go down. Okay, the left aileron is going up, so we're going to need to reverse that. Now let's check the rudder. When I move the stick to the right, the rudder ought to go to the right. That looks correct. So let's reverse the aileron. I'm going to hit my select button. I'm going to scroll down to Servo Setup. And I'm going to move over and highlight where it says Travel. I'm going to hit Select. Now I'm going to scroll over to Reverse. I'm going to hit Select. You can see I've got AIL for aileron highlighted. I'm going to hit Select, and that'll reverse it. Now when I move the stick to the right, the left aileron goes down. That's correct. Looking at my aileron, you'll notice that it looks like I need to do some trimming. This is easily done. I'm going into the Servo Setup menu again and hitting Select. Scrolling over and highlighting Travel, hitting Select. I'm going to go to my Sub-Trim menu and hit Select. I'm going to go to the aileron and hit Select. Now I can make adjustments. That looks good. I'll hit Select and back out. Everything looks good. Let's disconnect the battery, shut down the transmitter, and get all the tape removed from the airframe. The last step of our build is to install the prop. I'm making sure that this is a counterclockwise prop. For this build, we typically use a 9 or 10 inch prop. Once a prop is secure, the build process is complete. Now it's time to fly.